Okay, welcome to episode 2. Now, in this episode, we'll be talking mostly about abilities. Now, all of my examples will be of ranged abilities in this episode, as really, I only range PK, and I'm going to be able to give you guys the most in-depth examples and information and help on ranged abilities. Because really, if you can still gain information and help even if you're not going to be using ranged style for PKing from watching this video. But this will help you the most by giving you ranged abilities to use when you PK. So, talking about range PKing, I'll give you some abilities that I use. They're not all going to be range style abilities, such as Surge. It's a magic ability, but you can still use it if you're using range. Debilitate, defensive ability, but you can still use it even if you don't have a shield. Natural Instinct, another defensive ability. Sacrifice is a health ability, an HP, a constitution ability. Onslaught, constitution ability. So let's talk really general here first. So generally speaking, there are 3 types of abilities. There are basics, thresholds, and ultimate abilities. Basics gain you 8% adrenaline each time you use one of them. Thresholds, they cost 15% adrenaline when you use them, and they require you to have 50% adrenaline to use them. Ultimate abilities cost 100%, and they require 100% to use. Let's take it one step further and go a little bit more in depth than just basics, thresholds, and ultimate abilities. For those of you who don't know, each ability kind of has a little twist to it. Now, let's have an example here. Let's say Piercing Shot. Piercing Shot does 94% weapon damage if you hit your target with it. But the twist is, if your target is stunned, your Piercing Shot does up to 188% weapon damage. So you can see, if you understand how these abilities work, you can start figuring out how to chain them together in order to perform a combo. So I'll put up on your screen a few different basic abilities that I frequently use while PKing, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about what each one does. So I'm just going to give you a real general idea what each of these abilities does. Now, the top left corner is Binding Shot. What this ability does is it binds your opponent and stuns them for a short amount of time. So, different ways you can use this ability. This ability is a stun and a bind ability. So, you can kind of assume situations that it would be useful in, such as, say someone's running away from you. You can bind them in place. But with EoC PvP, you gotta outthink your opponent. What else would a bind be useful for, or a stun? What does a stun do? It stops them in their tracks. It stops them from doing whatever they're doing. So, let me give you a situation here. Say you're praying against your opponent. See the ability in the top right corner. That's Snipe. Say your opponent is using range. That's Snipe. What it does is it hits you and knocks off your protection prayer. You don't want your protection prayer knocked off. So say your opponent uses Snipe. And the thing about Snipe is it takes a few seconds of animation before your opponent actually hits you. So you don't want your prayers knocked off. Your opponent starts to use snipe. What do? You use a stun ability. It stops them from performing that ability, and your prayers don't get knocked off. It's cause and effect. The thing about PvP is you gotta learn what these abilities do, and you gotta think out of the box. How can I use these abilities against my opponent and stop him in his tracks? So the middle ability on the top, Dazing Shot, I don't really use this for a particular situation. It can be used, but you gotta be very, very quick about it. So what Dazing Shot does, it hits your opponent and it gives them less accuracy for their next attack. So you can use this in a particular situation. Say they start to use Tedral. You can quickly use Dazing Shot, and if it hits them, that Tedral has less of a chance to hit you. Let's talk about Snipe. Well, I already talked about Snipe for a little bit, but it basically, you use it when your opponent is praying and you want to take off their prayer. It takes about 3 seconds to hit your opponent. So once again, talking about using your abilities and linking them together. Say your opponent is running from you. You bind them, and then you use Snipe. That stops them from outrunning the Snipe. Okay, let's go down into the bottom left-hand corner. Now, some of you guys might not know what this ability is. This ability is Corruption Shot. Now, majority of you guys, if you're new to PvP, you don't really have a lot of money, you're not going to have this ability because it costs about 15-16 mil GP in order to unlock this ability, because you need to buy the Mazcab Ability Codex to unlock Corruption Shot. Now, it is a damage over time ability, which means you use it, and for the next da-da-da seconds, your opponent will be damaged. Now, the thing about Corruption Shot is over time, its damage weakens. So, say your first hit, the first hit of Corruption Shot is 1400. The next hit, maybe it's 900. Next hit, 500. It weakens over time. But damage over time, you can stack that damage up. So let's talk about use Corruption Shot, and then using an ability we already talked about, Dazing Shot. Corruption Shot will still be hurting them when you use Dazing Shot. So you're able to stack up your damage in order, and that's the start of a combo there. So the next ability, we're going to go middle bottom here, is Fragmentation Shot. Now, this is another damage over time ability, and the thing that's unique about this one is you hit your opponent with it, but if your opponent moves from the tile that he's in, its damage will multiply. So you hit your opponent. Once again, we're talking about manipulating your opponent and outthinking them. So specifically manipulating your opponent. So say you guys are right next to each other. You use Fragmentation Shot, and then you quickly walk underneath your opponent, causing him to walk out from underneath you to a tile one away from you. You caused him to move. You manipulated him in order to make him move. Now your Fragmentation Shot isn't doing 500 damage, it's doing 1000 damage each game tick. That's a significant increase in damage. And all you did was walk and make him move a tile. Once again, it's manipulation of your opponent in order to make him do something that gives you an advantage. And in the bottom right hand corner, we've got Piercing Shot, but we already talked about that. Next, let's move on to some threshold abilities. Okay, so thresholds. These are going to be what you are killing your opponent with 9 times out of 10. Now, let's quickly run over these abilities, and then I'll go more in depth about which ones are sometimes a little bit better. So, top left hand corner, you've got Bombardment. Multi-way ability, deals pretty good damage, but you got to be careful with this one. If you're in the wilderness and you're in a multi-way zone, let's give you a scenario. You're at Chaos Elemental. Someone attacks you and they've got a friend with you. You decide to fight back. Their other friend hasn't attacked you yet, but they're standing right next to their friend who you're fighting. You use Bombardment. You're not scald. The person you're fighting attacked you first. You use Bombardment. You just use a multi-way ability. You just hit their friend that's standing next to them. Now you're scald. You gotta be really careful about using multi-way abilities in the wilderness. I've used this same method to scald people multiple times. And let me tell you guys, it works way more times than it should, because people do not watch what they're using. Another one, Dragon Breath. Like, you don't even have to be risking too much, but you'll skull. Okay, you gotta be careful with multi-way abilities, guys. So the next one on there, top right-hand corner, Shadow Tendrils. Now, this one's another little tricky ability here, but not because it's a multi-way ability, but because it hurts you also. Now, the thing about Shadow Tendrils, crazy damage output. I was in Royal, like I said in the first video when I was talking about gear and how it doesn't really matter. I hit a 6k Tendril on a guy in full Serenic armor when I had a Royal Crossbow, and it was either 5k or 6k. You guys go rewatch the video. I said the name of it in the first episode of this series. But it also hurts you a significant amount of damage. And the more damage that it hurts you, and the more times it hurts you, the more damage it's going to be hitting on your opponent. So when you use this, typically you want to be above half HP when you use this, because some PKers, I know I do, once again, it's about outsmarting your opponent and manipulating them. You let your HP drop a little bit, they use Shadow Tendrils, they just hurt themselves a significant amount of damage. You eat quickly, then quickly stun your opponent, who's, once again, they just hurt themselves a significant amount of damage, then you finish them off. It's about outthinking your opponent. But be careful with Shadow Tendrils, but it is an extremely useful ability. You also need a quest to unlock it. I believe it's the Dig Site quest. It's not too hard of a quest. It does have a little bit of a high requirement. I forget exactly what, but majority of you guys who are higher leveled will probably have it unlocked. Now, next ability here is Rapid Fire. So, bottom left-hand corner, Rapid Fire. I consider this more of a food waster or a combo start rather than an actual KO ability. Same with Bombardment. Now, what it does is you hit your opponent multiple times. So, if you're thinking about this, let's think about making a combo here. You use Rapid Fire, hit your opponent, bam, 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 bam. What do you do next? You use Bombardment, hit your opponent once for high damage, then maybe you stun them, and then you finish off with Shadow Tendril. Once you learn these abilities and get practice, you can start picking out abilities that you can pair together in order to perform a combo. Like I said before, I mostly consider Rapid Fire a food waster. I use it in order to just make them eat. Typically when you use it, they will eat. They're not just going to let you deal damage to them. So yeah, use that either at the start of your combo or just use it throughout the fight. So the next, in the bottom middle, what we have is Snapshot. Now this is a fantastic KO ability. Same with Shadow Tendril. What Snapshot does is it hits your opponent twice, deals significant damage both times. I believe the highest Snapshot I've hit is 5 point something K. It was like a 2.2K and a 3.6K, something like that. But you can Snapshot, it doesn't really matter what your weapon is. Well, if you have a Royal Crossbow or up, you can manage to hit a 6K with it. Now, so if we're talking about, once again, talking about putting forward a combo, Rapid Fire. Bam, 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 bam. Bombardment. Hits them. Now, the thing about Bombardment is you do the animation of the ability, you aim up in the sky, shoot. There's a few seconds between when that ability is activated until when the ability actually hits your opponent. So you have about a second of delay there. So you use Bombardment, 1 second, then it hits your opponent. So knowing that, what do you do with an ability like Snapshot that hits them instantly? Almost instantly. Rapid Fire, bam, 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 bam. Bombardment, then Snapshot. So your Bombardment and your Snapshots hitting them at roughly the same time. And with abilities like Bombardment and Snapshot, it's pretty hard to either out-eat it or tank it. It's possible that it might miss, but typically it's going to kill your opponent depending on where their HP was when you started that combo. Now that's just really, okay, this last ability here is Tight Binding. Now what Tight Bindings does is, once again, it binds your opponent in place. It's basically, it's the threshold version of Binding Shot. It stuns your opponent for longer than Binding Shot, and it also binds them in place for a longer time than Binding Shot. Now, once again, let's talk about chaining our combos, chaining our abilities here. Rapid Fire, bam, 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 bam. Bombardment, hits them high amount. Maybe then you use Tight Bindings, stuns them so they can't eat. Then you finish it with a Snapshot. That's a pretty killer combo. So I'll probably end the video at thresholds here. I'll do ultimates in the next episode. But the takeaway from this video, I want you guys to start thinking about how you can combo and chain together different abilities. So the abilities that we kind of talked about in this episode were damage over time abilities, such as Fragmentation Shot, which also multiplies when you move them a tile. Thresholds such as Rapid Fire. We've got stuns such as Binding Shot. So let me give you another example of a combo. You're fighting a person, he's at full HP. Fragmentation Shot. You move him a tile, your 500 damage Fragmentation Shot's now doing 1,000, 1,200 damage per tick. You start using Rapid Fire. Now on top of that 1,000 damage a tick, you're now doing multiple hits on him each tick. So now you're stacking that damage. So now he's eating a bit, but it's very hard to out-eat that amount of damage. So now he's about half HP. Now you use Bombardment. High damage, and there's a tick delay. So you use Bombardment, then immediately use Tight Bindings. Tight Bindings can hit pretty hard. So now you just stacked the damage of Bombardment and Tight Bindings. So now he can't eat for about, I think it's like 2 or 3 seconds that it stuns them. He can't eat. Now what do you finish it with? Snapshot. Now you just did a combo. And honestly, I'd be surprised if you hit all of those abilities, none of them miss. I'd be surprised if he managed to tank it without putting up a shield. So I want you guys to think about different combos that you can pull out. Just think about damage over time, rapid hitting abilities such as rapid fire, stuns, and KO abilities such as shadow tendril and snapshot. Once again, I'll talk to you guys in the next video about ultimate abilities. Have a nice day.